Bonjour, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for this conversation between myself and the Bronfman Fellows in Contemporary Art. My name is Eunice Bélidor. I'm currently the Contemporary Canadian and Québécois Art Curator at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and I was invited by Concordia as part of my position as Affiliate Assistant Professor in the Department of Art History at Concordia University. And today I will be having a conversation with our recent Bronfman Fellow, which I will introduce to you right away. We will have Heidi Barkun appearing on the screen momentarily. Heidi is a transdisciplinary artist from Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. She has a Master of Art in Visual and Media Arts and Feminist Studies from UQAM, a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Concordia, and a Bachelor of Science from McGill. Her artworks have been shown in Canada, the US, Europe, and South America, and she has presented her research at academic conferences in Paris, New York, Aalborg, and Montreal. Heidi is artist in residence at the McConnell University de Montréal Research Creation Chair on the Reappropriation of Maternity. Her Bronfman Fellowship exhibition, Be Fruitful and Multiply, will be presented at Projet Casa in October 2022. Nico Williams is Anishinaabe and member of the Amjimwang First Nation community. He's currently working in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. He has a multidisciplinary, often collaborative practice that is centered around sculptural beadwork. His work has been shown internationally across Canada, including at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, Musée des beaux-arts de Montréal, Musée d'art contemporain de Montréal, Victoria Arts Council in British Columbia, the Phi Foundation for Contemporary Art, La Guilde, and his most recent solo exhibition, Chimigwech, at Never Apart. Mara Eagle is an American multimedia artist who lives on Turtle Island in Tiohtià:ke. Born in Boston, she holds a Bachelor of Arts from Marlborough College in Vermont and a Master of Fine Arts from Concordia University. Recently, her work has been exhibited at the Musée d'art contemporain de Montréal, the Canadian Center for Architecture, Critical Distance, the University of Kentucky Art Museum, Centre Clark, ADA-X, Leonard and Bina Ellen, and Saw Video in Ottawa. Et Leila Zelli, née en Iran, Leila Zelli vit et travaille à Montréal. Détentrice d'une maîtrise et de baccalauréat en arts visuels et médiatiques de l'UQAM, elle s'intéresse au rapport que l'on entretient avec les idées d'autres et d'ailleurs, et plus spécifiquement au sein de cet espace géopolitique souvent désigné par le terme discutable de Moyen-Orient. Son travail a entre autres été présenté à la Galerie Pierre-François Ouellette, Bradley Ertaskiran, au Conseil des arts de Montréal, à la Galerie de l'UQAM et à la Foire en art actuel de Québec. Ces réalisations font désormais partie de la collection du Musée d'art contemporain de Montréal, du Musée des beaux-arts de Montréal, la collection Prêt d'œuvres d'art du Musée national des beaux-arts de Québec, la collection du Musée de Baie-Saint-Paul, collection de la Caisse de dépôt et de passeport, et elle est lauréate du prix Bronfman de 2021. The conversation will mostly be happening in English, but there will be some French. If you have any questions, you can ask them in either language. We will be able to answer them in any of these languages. And before I start asking my questions, I want to mention that the Claudine and Stephen Bronfman Fellowship is awarded to visual artists who are recent graduates or about to graduate the Faculty of Fine Arts at UQAM or Concordia. It supports the fellows as they transition from academia into professional art world, as well as provide recognition and support to emerging artists. And personally, I love people who are able to support emerging artists and give those types of funds. So I thank them on your behalf, which I know you already done before. So my first question for all of you is, now that you did receive this fellowship, what kind of freedom do you want to take with your work now that you have received this award? I will start with you, Heidi.
Hello. Hello, Eunice. Bonjour, Leila. Hello, Mara. Hello, Nico. Hello, Mark behind there. before I answer your question, I just want to take a moment to thank the Foire, to thank Concordia, UQAM, and especially the Bronfman Foundation for making this panel accessible for me today. I'm not able to be with you for health reasons, but I so appreciate all the work everybody has done to make it possible for me to be with you. The freedom of my work, I think I'm a Bronfman laureate with Mara from 2020. And the announcement, I guess, when I heard was just 4 days before everything shut down for the pandemic. So I think that it's impossible to talk about the Bronfman Fellowship without talking about the pandemic and how that has unraveled, I guess, what we know, or I did for a little bit of the art world at the time. So I think at the beginning, I guess for the past year, because it's been about a year that I've been working with on the fellowship, has given me the freedom to actually be an artist. I think with so many of my peers who did not have that freedom as everything closed. And I felt at the time that I was one of two of the luckiest emerging artists in all of Canada, actually. Despite all sorts of other difficulties that happened over the past year, I still always had that knowledge and the freedom to continue working when everybody else did not, and the support that came with that. So I think that's sort of how I would see my answer to that question right now.
Thank you. Nico?
Yeah, exactly. To bounce with that, and like being this year's 2020 laureate with Leila, it was just like so incredible to get that, news, and it opened up so many doors and connections, and like, I got to get a larger studio and work with people, and now people are like coming through now that, things are starting to open up. There's a few more smiles going around with the mask coming off, sometimes with the vaccine coming out. And, it's just been like an incredible like journey. Like we just started this year, and already like there's been such like interest, and it's going to open up more possibilities. And when I received the news, it was just like, okay, now what am I going to do? Like, this is going to be like 2 years of intense research and continuing to like do more explorations with the practice. And it was just like incredible finding out that, that people were looking at beadwork differently now. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And I think it's going to open up more freedom of like incoming opportunities in the future. Yeah.
Mara?
For me, I would say the greatest freedom is being able to take risks. In the past 2 years, exploring new mediums for me has been sort of focused on 3D animation and doing like a pretty sizable new video. So being able to have the sort of solidity and support of the opportunities and also the financial support that this fellowship offers has really kind of opened up that venue for me of being able to explore a new medium and also do it take risks that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I'm really grateful for that.
Oui, dans le cas de Nico et moi, c'est quand même, on est des gagnants récents. Mais c'est sûr que dans mon cas aussi, j'ai pour la première fois un atelier. Mais aussi, je peux faire du bénévolat via des projets artistiques. Alors, je me suis engagée dans une école qui s'appelle le Musée. Je me sens super honorée de pouvoir être là sans y être comme travailleur, de les accompagner, mais aussi via d'autres projets artistiques que si j'avais pas reçu cet appui-là, j'aurais pas pu le faire parce que il faudrait toujours penser quand même à la vie, les dépenses autour, mais oui. Voilà.
Hey, a point that I think is interesting in most of your answers that I'd like to, delve a bit in it is the the studio and how it, you all either had a bigger studio or your studio practice has changed, but you also, just earlier, you mentioned that you didn't have a studio when you had your visit. So I wanted to understand a bit your relation with the studio, if anything has changed with the award, or if, your practice has changed because you're in a new space. So I'd like to delve a bit into that. Anyone?
Well, I during the pandemic, I had 4 studios, okay? And it was just bouncing around, right? There was a lot of bouncing around and sharing large spaces with groups of artists. Like, I went into so many spaces across Tiohtià:ke, okay? Like, I was in St. Henri, and then I was like by the Jack Carter Bridge, and then I was like, in Verdun. And then I started working on this Sick Kids Monument this year, and this was like between when I was signing for a new studio, and we were all weaving from our home. So like my team and I, we were all beating this monument for the brave, right? And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna get another studio. And then I was sharing with more people. And then that person actually had to give up that studio. And so when the Bronfman came in, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to just dive in and I'm going to sign this. Like, I was like with this wonderful person who had seen the beadwork exhibition at the MAC, and they were like, oh my gosh, you inspired me to start making work again. And it's right by your house. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And the studio is such a critical part of being an artist because it gives you that freedom to move around, work out ideas, stick things around, redo things, and it's just great to have people coming in together and working. And that was one of the first things that I had said when I was talking with Andy from Concordia. He was like, what are you gonna do? And I was like, the studio. like this pandemic was nuts. Like I was, like we're working from our home and then we're going to different spaces. So it was an incredible opportunity. Yeah, very important, the studio.
Heidi, do you currently work out a studio?
I do. I'm in my studio now. Actually, yeah, I was very, as a chronically ill disabled artist, when the pandemic hit, and I knew I wanted to get a studio, and it was sort of the joy of part of this fellowship. It was difficult to navigate. I was very fortunate that I was able to find a space, a residential space, and turn it into a studio temporarily that I've been holding. And thanks to the fellowship, I could do that. And I think for me, it has, because my work is so tied to the domestic space, it's been really incredible creating from a domestic space. That's not my home, but almost my home. So I think it's really enriched this process, and I'm so grateful to that, all these sort of constraints actually in how do I find a space that will be secure for me during a global pandemic, sort of coincided and allowed me to have this amazing domestic small space that works really fantastically as a studio.
So I don't have a studio, and I'm someone who, because I work digitally, and I like to be able to jump on and be in my space at midnight, and then walk away and come back and sort of move in and out of the sort of creative process very fluidly between my, just everyday life and also making. For me, that separation of having like a designated space for making has never been, I don't know, I've just actually never felt super comfortable with it. So what I've been exploring in the pandemic is actually how much is possible now with, for example, my collaborator who works in Berlin. And so we're creating an entire 17-minute animated film without ever having met each other. And this is possible because of things like Dropbox and Google Drive. So that's also kind of interesting. And also, for example, like Zoom studio visits for me have been the first time that I've really felt like I've been able to show my work in an honest way, because if I have visitors come, it's really, we just end up sitting around the computer anyways, because basically I'm a filmmaker. So yeah, actually I've sort of thrived in this milieu of Zoom and internet connectivity and being able to do studio visits with people in Toronto, people in the States, people that I work with who are in LA and the Bay Area. So it's actually been wonderful for me to be able to have a studio space that is fully kind of digitally connected, and having that be more recognized as a studio space instead of feeling like I have to like tack up little pictures on my wall for when someone comes. So so it's really worked well for me.
Oui. Non, mais c'est drôle parce que moi aussi, je fais de l'art numérique. Alors, j'avais pas réellement besoin d'un atelier. Mon atelier, c'est mon ordinateur. Mais là, vu que je me suis procuré cet espace-là, j'amène mon ordinateur avec moi et c'est comme si je restais encore à la maison, mais c'est comme ça me fait du bien quand même après la pandémie de faire ce voyage entre Pierrefonds et Montréal, parce que j'habite à Pierrefonds. Et de rester dans un espace que j'appelle l'atelier, mais voilà. Il n'y a pas de grande différence entre ma manière de travailler parce que ça reste quand même à l'ordinateur. Ouais.
Nico, you seem like you wanted to jump on the idea that Mara was saying when she talked about the computer.
Oh yeah, well, a lot of my practice is also digital. And so I literally have like 3 sort of digital sketchbooks like kicking around, like old laptops, like the desktop. And then, like it's just like we are like, using all these digital, meeting platforms right now. And like one of the works that I had presented actually was very based on that. And, that connection to like the handmade and the digital. So I was just like thinking about that, and I was like, yeah, like the studio, because like I do beadwork and it's fairly small, and I was like, people get shocked when they're like, you need a studio, and it's big, right? Because you just have all these sort of places where it's like situating around, and I thought like that was just funny that the practice is very digital right now, and cool.
Hey, nice.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to mention is that I've encountered all of your practice through very different, in very different ways. And I saw, Heidi, your work the first time at Galerie de l'UQAM, and, we were having tea, and it was just a very lovely moment where, you were in the space, but you were also sharing your story and just sharing space and time with people. And Nico, I saw your work many times, but the first time, and I like to say that I saw one of the first research was when we had a crit at Concordia, and I saw the beadworks that you did of all of the ingredients for pain banique. So
yeah.
And Mara, I saw your project at the MAC, and you could immerse yourself and just lie on this beautiful inflated structure and just enjoy the video. And Leila, my God, I mean, I've seen so many of your work, but I remember these little like windows that you made at the Galerie de l'UQAM. So there were very different ways that I entered in your practice, and I'm wondering if, it's been a few years still I've seen this project, and I'm wondering if something is different, if you're working on something new, or if what I've seen from you is something that I should use as like a reference point for other projects that I will be seeing of you.
Parfait. Oui, alors si j'ai bien compris que c'est comme je vais parler de ce que je fais, est-ce que ce que je fais maintenant, c'est différent de ce que tu as vu ou de ce que je
c'est ça.
faisais
Est-ce que dans le fond, la première fois que j'ai vu ton travail,
oui.
Est-ce que c'est aussi un peu le point de référence que je peux utiliser pour comprendre ton travail à chaque fois que je vais le revoir?
Oui, c'est vrai que mon travail reste quand même des installations numériques dans l'espace, mais depuis la pandémie, même si j'ai fait à peu près 12 expositions collectives. Ça reste quand même, c'est devenu un travail plus numérique que des installations dans l'espace, même si je pense que c'est quand même plus riche quand on rentre dans mes installations d'une manière physique. Mais après, c'est comme grâce à la pandémie, mon travail a pris quand même, ma manière de travailler a changé. Je travaille depuis avec une artiste israélienne à distance d'une manière internationale, ce que j'avais peut-être jamais pensé de faire même si la pandémie n'était pas là. Donc oui, ça ouvre d'autres manières de travailler, de voir peut-être les projets à venir. Voilà.
I can go next. So the project that Eunice is referring to is a two-channel video installation, which I did in the show L'oiseau non, attends. C'était quoi? C'était La machine qui enseignait des airs aux oiseaux, which was curated by Marc Langto and François Le Tourneux. And I made this large, metallic, inflatable, and the piece I showed was called Théâtre de l'Inconnu. And for me, that work was a real sort of moment in my... I think my growth into who I am as an artist now. Prior to that, I was really sort of interested in conceptualism and still am. But for me, there was a certain point at which I found that all of the sort of pieces of art history that I'd worked through in my teens and my 20s, they kind of I'd finally metabolized them in that work and found a certain freedom which brought all of my interests in science and technology, the history of representation of nature and the body. And it was sort of this moment where everything that had informed me and shaped me as an artist kind of became indistinguishable in this sort of like mucky kind of hummus. And it really felt like the first time that I had like realized myself in a way that wasn't, I don't want to say derivative, but that wasn't always sort of pointing at people that had inspired me. And it was also the first work that I made that I felt like I really couldn't explain. And this has become something that's really important to me, is that I always want to create work that somehow gets away from me. And when I become like the master of explanations of my work, it dies. And the piece that you're referring to that you first encountered for me still has this kind of mysteriousness about it that when I try to write a grant, for example, it's really hard because I can't really put my finger on it. And this is sort of increasingly something that I look for, is like something that escapes me and that the work has a certain autonomy. And also that I have this, I kind of fall madly in love with the characters that I create. And the character in that has this like butterfly mask and this very elongated neck and this stuttering way of speaking. And she's just like this sort of presence that I love her, that character. So I feel like that work is super important, and I'm glad that that's how you came to sort of be familiar with my work. So yeah.
Yeah, like the first work you had seen, it was like the Bequajigan Bannock 24 karat gold beaded labels, right?
Yes.
And I think when you had seen them, they weren't on the velvet, right? They were on this plexiglass thing.
They were installed and you were not sure.
Yeah.
How they needed to be installed, and these were things you were trying out. So then
Oh, yeah.
there's a version.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, Marc and Francois had come by my studio, and they were like, coming in and they were looking and they were like, there's beadwork on the ceiling, there's beadwork on the floor, there's beadwork here. And then they were like, Nico, you're just putting beadwork like everywhere in your studio, because I'm always constantly trying to figure out how people can experience it in the space. And, you know, I kept going with like these objects that are loaded in Indigenous subject matter. And there's lots of layers constantly through the objects that I choose or present to people. If I'm in front of the work talking with people, we could get really deep into it. And it's like very awesome once we get there together and they're like, it's magical. But for that exhibition at the MAC, like I was traveling a lot that year before the pandemic had hit. I was like counting how many flights I went on, and I think it was like over 12 at one point, and almost went to like 17. And I was like in Boston, and Mark and Francois were like, "Oh, we're gonna put your lottery tickets in the MAC," and then the world shut down, and then I was like, okay, like there was supposed to be more exhibitions places. And then I was like, wait, now I have time to really look at these tickets. Like it was 3 individual tickets. And then I got to have like that intimate moment with the work where I was like, you know, I'm going to spend more time with it. And then I started literally stretching the tickets longer, thinking of like debonair sort of rules of the tickets, of it all connected together. And, you know, we were in the studio working on it, and it gave time, and the idea developed more into the Mont Caché. So it gave that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, beadwork takes a long time to make. It's handmade. It's also digital because we plan it digitally before going there. So it really like developed the practice and gave more dimension to it. And then Daniel Fissette from the Phi Foundation contacted me also during this period, was like, hey, Nico, would you like to, you know, do a project with us in response to Diaspora and Painting exhibition? And I was like, this is interesting. I'm a bead worker, you know, and I was like, and I love painting. Like I love going to look at paintings, you know. So then I was like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a community-based beadwork project. And then I started thinking about the importance of community and, you know, how it's handmade. And I was talking with my advisor, Nadia Mir, at the time, and I was like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all these people who've never beaded before to bead little swatches, and I'm going to send them in the mail, and they're going to send it back, and we're going to weave this large image together. And I was like, and then I started thinking about community, and then we're on Zoom, or no, we weren't on Zoom, we were on this digital platform, and I show up in September, and then we have like 25 random strangers from all over Canada, and they got little packs of beads, needles. None of them know how to bead. Well, maybe a couple of them. They put their images in it. When you go see it, you'll see the ones that knew how to bead because they sort of show off. And, you know, we were beading like the Brady Bunch, like, you know, like where it's just like all these little faces. And I think it really was like this intimate thing where it's like digital, handmade, sending it back to Tiohtià:ke, the community working on it through the entire country, you know, and then seeing it all come together and exploring, you know, I was looking at, it's called Andabikinagan, and it means gear shift. And I was looking at, you know, how this island has changed, you know, since colonization. So it really gave me a moment to really reflect on it. So, yeah.
Nice. Thank you. How about you, Heidi? If I were to see the work you're preparing, because we already know that you're going to have your project at CASA, if I were to go, would I find the same entry point as I have when I first visited your project at UQAM, for instance?
I think it's an interesting question, actually. And that exhibition at UQAM is called Let's Get You Pregnant. And the space was very purposefully kind of split into a side that it talked about the failure of reproductive technology like IVF. So and the side was split with a very sort of colder side where I had vitrines, even though they were sort of warmer, with these artifacts of the 27 women who were participants in the project. And on the other side was a salon, sort of let's say sort of a surrogate my living room, where I put up draperies and had a living room space where the public was invited to listen to a 6-hour conversation. And it was 6 hours because I thought it was important that we really occupy the space of the gallery for the 6 hours that it was open. And so the idea of conversation was really important. So I created, out of my one-on-one conversations with these women, a 6-hour conversation where each woman was, I guess, stable in one of the speakers, and then the conversation bounced around between speakers, right? As if one person spoke and then the next person kind of answered. I mean, of course, it was all made up to a certain extent, but the idea around the conversation is really important for me in my work, and I think that's the thread that we can take kind of through everything. So this idea of creating spaces of conversation to talk about taboo subjects. So my ideas about illness and about infertility or about identity are all there in the show next year for the fellowship. But what has I guess, changed in some way or been brought back with my practice before the master's was I was able to sort of weave in the materiality that was so present in my practice before I did the master's. So the master's really allowed me to, and culminated in that show that you saw, and it really allowed me to find a way to weave together my interests in my art with my theory interests in science and all that, and critique about medical systems and systems in general, and identities and all that. But where I guess you might see a bit more of this, a similar vein, let's say, only different, is in the project that I'm doing for the chaire at McConnell at Université de Montréal. And so that, because of the pandemic, like Leila had said, it forced me to create differently. And I think Mara spoke about this too. And I guess we're all speaking about this. So I made, because the exhibition that we're going to have in the spring is a virtual exhibition, primarily, there may be, we're working on collaborations with the libraries at Université de Montréal, but I can't say any more than that. But the exhibition, it was conceived virtually, and so for the first time, I made a virtual work actually, and so that's really changed. And so then, how do I? And because the chair is so long, the residency is over 4 years. I talk about a subject that is very taboo, which is about abuse in reproductive technologies, and there's no real definition of abuse, so I can't give you one. So, but we are 20. I do have 22 participants so far, and it is this time open to not only people who have used reproductive technologies and with whatever results they have, but also, and all of them, but also people in the system. And so it's changed a bit, right? And so how do we implicate people who work in medical system in some way, in reproductive technologies, into these conversations? And how do we open up these conversations to be a bit larger than just experience, and really talk about the systems themselves? So those ideas and how to translate them or transmediate them online is something that is new and interesting. But for the Bronfman, I think it's really will be kind of a combination of both. And so I do have a component because it's about the history of a very specific moment in history of Project CASA, where in the 40s and 50s, where it was a maison de naissance, and it is implicated in a very interesting story about a black market baby ring in the 40s and 50s. And it, anyways, all to be discovered, but just that to say that there are people involved and there are other voices involved and there are other conversations to have And so I think that's really the unifying thread that you'll see throughout my work.
Thank you. There is so many things that you said that I could, bounce back with you all and, make specific questions, but I'm not sure of the time we have. So I'm going to go again with, the questions that I have, but this is great so far. I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you all because it's been very nourishing. I'm learning a lot from you, and I'm also understanding a little bit more of the things that I've seen from you before. So just for myself, I think this is great. So one thing that you touch upon, Heidi, that makes me segue into my next question. I know as part of the way that I described you and read your bio, you have a background in science and you have done a lot of conferences. And all of you, as part of the Bronfman, have been selected in an academic context. But we're here at the fair in a private, gallery setting. So how do you see this parallel or difference? And, how are you seeing your presence in this dichotomy?
Well, I think, out there in the fair, it's wonderful to be a part of Papier and be invited here on behalf of the Bronfmans, and you know what, as you go out there, it's great. And I think this is the best part that I could say is that, we're all in person now and we're looking at art. So I was waiting and waiting and waiting for things to open up, to just go to galleries, to just go see, I was like, come on, Mac, I want to see art. Even when I was installing, I just wanted to just stay there forever and look at everybody's work. And I think that's why we're all here. We're here to experience visual art. And it's great to see each other all enjoying it. So that's what I have to say.
Could you clarify the question?
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand.
Yes, sure. Because you were all your recent graduates, and I'm pretty sure as part of the element that you were selected, your research was important, and not necessarily the actual practice. I know it was part of, it was part of the decision because you're all great artists, but also you were all selected as part of the research that you have done. You all have graduate studies, and now we're here in a context where it's not. The research part is not the thing that we see up front when we see the work. And so I wanted to discuss this with you.
Okay. I feel most at home in sort of black boxes where I think I'm very invested in spectacle. And for me, the sort of experience of getting carried away, it happens through video and through sound is what moves me the most. So I'm still finding my way in terms of what my relationship will be to the commercial art world. I'm very invested in arts education. I love that vulnerable age in an undergraduate program where people are taking risks and you just see the strangest, weirdest stuff that smells bad and it's rotting and people are yelling and getting people are naked. It's just wild. Art school is awesome and I love to be a part of it's such a privilege to be able to teach. So I think for me my real heart and soul is really in the power of art to be a disruptive political force and to provide experiences which are strange and out of the everyday. So I love coming here and I'm super inspired in particular by artists who have a strong impulse to make things with their hands and have achieved this incredible sort of level of craft. And that's something that I just, I love seeing that. But yeah, I think personally I really where I get super excited is in a milieu of arts education and also really kind of Baroque large venues, because I like to do very big shows and big, I'm sort of like go big or go home. So it's fantastic to be in this little booth. So it is a really different world. So it is kind of interesting, your question pointing to the differences. But.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez là? Oui. C'est vrai que c'est un monde vraiment différent, surtout ayant étudié à l'UQAM, qui met vraiment l'accent sur la recherche. Quand tu rentres dans une foire, c'est sûr que tu vois surtout l'art à travers la forme, les couleurs. C'est comme tu n'as pas accès vraiment au contexte. C'est ça qui me manque. Et quand je regarde les codes QR, je me demande est-ce que ça donne accès à la recherche, au contexte dans lequel l'œuvre avait été créée. Et de me retrouver ici, c'est quand même c'est un privilège. Mais aussi, j'ai la chance d'être, oui, dans le kiosque de Bronfman, mais aussi avec la galerie Pierre-François Ouellette. Alors, c'est comme inconsciemment, je suis rentrée d'une manière pas mal naturelle et organique. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui, je ne sais pas, peut-être qu'il y a quand même. Oui, comme d'une manière naturelle et organique, je suis rentrée aussi dans le monde de marché de l'art, mais je n'ai pas encore vraiment accès à comment ça marche et tout. Mais ce qui est super, c'est que ça rend quand même l'art contemporain peut-être un peu plus accessible. Les gens ont peut-être moins peur de rentrer dans une foire que d'aller voir une exposition d'art contemporain. Et ça, c'est super. C'est comme, voilà.
Yeah, I mean, just to say what Leila's saying, I think that the public is different. I mean, first of all, I'm not with you, so, right? I am on video, I am not actually present. So I think for that, I think it highlights, I guess, maybe the challenges that we face as people are getting back to in person, as people, disabled, chronically ill people, immune compromised people face in the pandemic. And when things are sort of getting back to normal and everybody's in person, I think right here we are sort of looking at the challenges, I guess, that an artist like myself might face when a lot of this happens on a face-to-face, meeting people in person that we've been so hungry for, right? So, so there's that. But I think that, like Eunice, like you said, part of my practice is really about mediation and talking to the public and getting stories from the public. And so, even though there isn't maybe, like Leila said, not the entranceway or the text or an information or context. For me, I've always been really drawn to these types of events because you get people who are not always comfortable going into museums, and it allows like them to just sort of get a glimpse of all these different things all around them. And so I think that I guess that combined with sort of me coming back to making or unmaking or with the materiality with the work that I'm showing here, I think those two things went together. And how do I find an accessible or what can I put forward that would be accessible and interesting to people who would just not necessarily see the entire context of the work. And the work here is really not even the whole context of the work. It's just 5 pieces within a larger installation. So I guess that sort of became really a conscious strategy. And how do I use the opportunity that is available in this sort of very unique space that is a foire to really talk to people and even though I'm not there, but still talk to people about the conversations that I would like to be having about infertility in this case.
Hey, thank you. There's a lot of your answers pick a bit on the next question that I have, because as part of the award that you've received, there is a teaching component. Some of you have started, some of you are preparing it, some of you have not. None of you have done it yet, right? So I wanted to, you have all been selected as emerging artists, but also sharing your knowledge is part of the award. So I wanted to, you mentioned it very well, how much you like our art education and how much it informs your practice. But, how about all of you? Is this the same? Is this different?
Well, yeah, I'm so excited about it. Like, we get to choose when we're going to start to teach. And during the pandemic, I had first started with the Phi Foundation, doing that virtual workshop with 25 participants, and right now I'm doing one with UBC with 70 participants, and with UBC, I'm teaching teachers how to teach. It's so funny, right? But it's virtual, right? Like, they're in Vancouver, I'm here, and I remember doing like TA when I was in Concordia, and it was in person and it was sculpture, right? And then people are moving around, working with stuff, ideas will work or they're not. And like, when they asked me, they were like, "Oh, would you want to do it this year?" I was like, no, I'm gonna wait till next year. So it could be like maybe a hybrid where it's like sort of in person, virtual. Like, I just want to like be there with people, because I've been online with the Brady Bunch forever. Like, I just want to see, students and like really inspire them and get them excited to create and go out there. Like, that's, I think, our job as artists, to create work that really gets people happy, that will like get people excited and, just steering them in their creative direction. And I think that's the best part about teaching, is like you never know like what's going to come of it, Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll go. I'm preparing right now to teach a course at Concordia, which I love. It's called ArtX, and it's one of the few interdisciplinary courses, because you probably some people are familiar. Concordia has sort of a Bauhausian model, which a lot of CEGEPs also still have, where it's divided into printmaking, sculpture, painting, and probably one other, ceramics. And so ArtX is this really interesting course that's at Concordia, where it's really contemporary art practice, where it's encouraging students who are coming from this kind of an obsolete sort of background, like of Bauhaus, like, because it's not really, it doesn't really reflect contemporary practice. And so I think it's, I think the program should actually be expanded, because it's this wonderful opportunity where they have this freedom to not just make whatever they want within a certain discursive context, but to actually like combine different medium, make drawings that have a sound element, performance, which is, exploring like walking practices and really thinking about documentation and things of this nature. So, yeah, I am very excited that our courses are going to be in person, and and it's really fun. Like, the sort of, when people are in their undergrad studies, a lot of them are like super radical and have this incredible energy. And it's really interesting for me to also see them not just develop as artists, but also develop as an art audience, and to sort of show up for each other as peers, and really sort of foster a conversation among each other. And I sort of, as a teacher, see my role as kind of leading from behind. I try to center the students as much as possible in terms of their own feedback that they give each other. So those are things that are important to me as a teacher.
Est-ce que tu as commencé à y penser?
Oui. Mais justement, dans mon cas, c'est quand même, je ne vois pas l'enseignement seulement en allant dans une classe, dans un cours, en étant l'artiste engagé socialement que je suis. Je pense que aussi l'enseignement, ça se transmet ou ça se passe à travers l'art qu'on fait. mais aussi à travers les tables rondes, les conférences, les colloques, ce genre de choses. Mais sinon, c'est quand récemment, je me suis engagée auprès des jeunes, des enfants. Je pense que c'est, oui, même si peut-être que, oui, je ne sais pas, les Bronfman, c'est quoi leur souhait, mais d'aller vraiment comme enseigner dans une classe à l'université, je pense que c'est aussi important de travailler avec les enfants de base âge, oui, en bas âge, parce que je ne sais pas, c'est comme vraiment la transmission, ça se passe de cet âge-là. Présentement, je suis dans un projet avec le centre Optica. Ça va être comme un projet à long terme, 6 mois. À chaque semaine, je rentre dans une classe une classe primaire avec les enfants qui ont hâte de découvrir qu'est-ce qu'on va faire, tout autant sur l'aspect réflexif de l'art et de travail que la création. Alors, oui, c'est comme je vois les étoiles dans les yeux de Nico quand il parle de donner des cours à l'université. J'en ai aussi quand je vais dans une école primaire. Voilà.
And Heidi, how about you?
Yeah, I think like we talked about in our short discussion before, I think the pandemic has really changed the way we see education and pedagogy in general. And I think that to be honest, it's something I knew from the beginning that some of the laureates from UQAM had sort of put off until the end, just in order to be able to concentrate on working on their work for the fellowship or other projects that they have at the time. And so I have to admit that I did feel somewhat comforted by that. But also, given that it was a pandemic last year, right? In full pandemic and everything was closed. It wasn't something necessarily that I had to think about. And then now that things have restarted and we're talking about hybrid teaching or in-person teaching, and that's where sort of the real challenges become, I guess, for somebody like me, right? So I don't know how to hybrid teach, right? So how does one learn how to do this? How does one learn how to do this well? And I think so many educators are struggling right now with that exact thing, who are very experienced teachers. And so I think young teachers, and especially, people with not that much experience, I guess, primary experience. I have experience with, like Leila said, all sorts of other ways of teaching, and being a teacher's assistant in all different classes in all different ways. But nevertheless, the actual teaching itself has changed dramatically in the past year. And so these are a lot of questions that I have, but I kind of feel like maybe because I don't have answers to them and don't know how things are going forward, or even with in-person, with new variants, if that's even going to be ultimately a possibility for me based on my health. So I think these are all very valid questions to think about, and I have been, but I don't have any real answers or know how necessarily it will play out given the uniqueness of the context.
I thank you all very much for your generous answers. I had a lot of fun being with you today, and it was perfect. I feel like